Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was a Shinigami trainee in Bleach. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. Death was not an ending. Izuku Midoriya had learned that strange, disorienting truth the moment he'd opened his eyes to a sky that wasn't his own. It was a serene, unchanging azure, devoid of the familiar pollution haze of Muzidafu or the comforting silhouette of distant skyscrapers. There were no clouds, no sun, only an endless, placid blue that stretched into eternity. He remembered the fire. The roar of it, the suffocating heat, the villain's cruel, fluid laughter. He remembered the desperate screams of the little girl trapped under a fallen chunk of concrete, her parents held back by the police line. He remembered the heroes, all of them, occupied with the villain, their quirks flashing like a deadly fireworks display. No one was looking at the girl. No one could get to her, no one but him. Quirkless, useless, pathetic Deku. The name echoed in his head, a ghost of a taunt from a life that was now, quite literally, a ghost. But in that moment, it hadn't mattered. All that mattered was the girl's terrified, tear-streaked face. All Might's voice, a memory from a rooftop conversation that had both shattered and forged him, had whispered in his soul. You too can be a hero, so he had run. He had scrambled over debris, his lungs burning, his worn-out red shoes skidding on asphalt. He'd used the last of his adrenaline-fueled strength to push, to heave, to move the slab of concrete just enough for her to crawl out. He remembered the brief, brilliant flash of her grateful smile before the building, destabilized and groaning, had finally given way. There was a moment of crushing, absolute pain, and then, nothing. Then this. This place, he'd been told by a kindly old soul named Chio, was the Soul Society. Specifically, the first district of the Rukongai, Junranin. It was, she'd explained with a gentle, wrinkled smile, where souls went when they died in the world of the living. It was a peaceful place. Orderly. A stark, quiet contrast to the vibrant, chaotic world he'd left behind. The architecture was simple, ancient in a way that felt both foreign and comforting. Rows of small, single-story wooden houses with tiled roofs lined unpaved, dusty streets. There were no cars, no trains, no buzzing electrical wires overhead. The only sounds were the murmur of quiet conversation, the shuffle of sandals on dirt, and the occasional laughter of children who, like him, were still getting used to an existence without scraped knees or the need for food. Souls here didn't require sustenance in the same way, though many ate for comfort, for the memory of it. They didn't truly age either. They simply existed. For Izuku, this placid existence was a unique form of torment. He sat on the worn engawa of the small dwelling he shared with Chio, a weathered notebook open on his lap. It was a new one, a gift from another soul who had run a stationery shop in his previous life. The habit was too deeply ingrained to stop. Observations on the Afterlife, Volume 1. The title was embarrassingly earnest, but it was his only anchor to the person he used to be. He tapped a cheap brush pen against a blank page. What could he even analyze here? The social structure was simple. The physics were spiritual. The biggest mystery, the one that gnawed at him, was the one thing he couldn't see: the Shinigami. Soul Reapers. Chio spoke of them with a mixture of reverence and fear. Black-robed guardians who purified malevolent spirits called hollows and guided souls to this place. She said they were the protectors of the balance, wielders of immense power. Some souls, she'd whispered, could see them clearly. They were the ones with high spiritual power. Izuku had none. Or at least, none that he could feel. It was a cruel, cosmic joke. In a world of quirks, he was quirkless. In a world of spiritual energy, he was blind. He would occasionally see a blur of black cloth flicker at the edge of his vision or feel a sudden, oppressive weight in the air that made the other souls around him bow their heads in respect. But the figures themselves remained invisible, ethereal. He was, once again, on the outside looking in, powerless to perceive the very forces that governed his new reality. Daydreaming again, young one? Izuku jumped, startled. Chio stood behind him, her back bent with the gentle stoop of an age she no longer truly possessed. She held a small cup of steaming tea, the aroma familiar and calming. Ah, Chio-san. Sorry. Just thinking, she chuckled, a sound like dry leaves rustling. You are always thinking. Your mind is like a busy water wheel, always turning. But you look so sad when you do it. She shuffled over and sat beside him, placing the cup in his hands. The warmth was a phantom, a memory of heat his soul could interpret, but it was comforting all the same. I feel useless here, Izuku admitted, his voice barely a whisper. It's just like before. Chio looked at him, her dark, ancient eyes filled with a deep well of empathy. She had heard his story, bits and pieces of it, in the quiet evenings they shared. The story of a boy who wanted to be a hero more than anything. You are not useless, Izuku-kun, she said softly. You died saving a child. There is no greater purpose than that. Here you have earned your peace. The word felt like sandpaper on his tongue. He didn't want peace. He wanted to help. He wanted to stand between the innocent and the things that sought to harm them. But here, there was nothing to fight. The Shinigami handled the dangers. The Rukongai, especially a high-numbered district like Junranin, was a sanctuary. But what if there is danger? He pressed, the analyst in him unable to let it go. You mentioned hollows. What are they exactly? Chio's expression sobered. She pulled her simple robe tighter around her shoulders, as if from a sudden chill. They are the ones who failed to find peace. Lost souls twisted by regret, hunger, and despair. They devour other souls to fill the emptiness where their hearts used to be. They are monsters, Izuku-kun. Things of nightmare. That is why we have the Shinigami. They are our shield. Izuku scribbled furiously in his notebook. Hollows corrupted souls. Consume other souls. Motivated by hunger/despair. Primary threat. Handled by Shinigami. He felt a familiar pang of frustration. Handled by others. Always handled by others. He spent the next few weeks in that same listless state. He helped Chio with chores, listened to the stories of other souls, and filled his notebook with theories and observations. He noted the subtle fluctuations in the air he now understood to be spiritual pressure. He tried to train his senses, to see the Shinigami that walked among them, but it was like trying to see the wind. He could only feel the effects. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that the peace was shattered. He was sitting near a small, dusty clearing where a group of child souls were playing a simple game with a small, hand-sewn ball. Among them was a little boy named Yuta, a shy child with wide, curious eyes who had arrived only a month ago. Izuku had taken a small liking to him, often sharing stories of the heroes from his world, describing All Might's power with such passion that Yuta's eyes would light up with wonder. The first sign was a change in the air. It wasn't the heavy, respectful pressure of a Shinigami. This was something else. Something cold, foul, and utterly predatory. The serene blue sky seemed to dim, taking on a sickly, grayish tint. A low, guttural moan echoed from nowhere and everywhere at once, a sound that vibrated deep in the core of Izuku's soul. The other souls felt it too. Conversations died. The game of catch stopped, the ball falling to the dirt with a soft thud. Heads turned, searching for the source of the growing dread. Then, the sky tore open. It wasn't a gentle parting. It was a violent, jagged rip in the fabric of reality, a screaming black void fringed with crackling red energy. From that tear, a nightmare unfolded. A grotesque creature, immense and bone-white, began to pull itself through. It was vaguely humanoid, but its limbs were too long, its body emaciated and twisted. A gaping, black hole sat in the center of its chest, a void of absolute nothingness. Its face was covered by a stark white mask, like a crude, broken skull, with a single, manic eye that glowed with a hungry, red light. A hollow panic erupted. The calm of Junranin dissolved into a symphony of terror. Souls who had known nothing but peace for decades were suddenly reminded of the violent deaths that had brought them here. They screamed. They ran, a tide of spectral bodies flooding the narrow streets, desperate to put distance between themselves and the monster. Izuku was frozen. His mind, usually his greatest asset, was screaming at him. Threat analysis, unknown power level. Hostile intent, 100%. Civilian casualties imminent. Shinigami response time, unknown. But his body was locked in place, paralyzed by the same, familiar, gut-wrenching terror he'd felt 100 times in his old life when faced with a villain he couldn't fight. He was quirkless. He was powerless. He was going to die. Again. Run. The single, primal command screamed in his brain. Run, you idiot! You can't do anything. His feet were rooted to the spot. The hollow let out another guttural roar, a sound of pure, ravenous hunger. It took a heavy, lumbering step forward, its monstrous gaze scanning the fleeing souls like a predator choosing from a herd. Its single red eye landed on the clearing, and on Yuta. The little boy was standing right where the ball had dropped, his small body trembling uncontrollably. He was staring at the hollow, his face a mask of pure, uncomprehending terror. He was too scared to even cry. The world seemed to slow down. Izuku saw the hollow's long, clawed fingers twitch. He saw the drool, thick and black as tar, leaking from the jagged mouth of its mask. He saw Yuta, small and helpless and alone. In that instant, every fear, every insecurity, every lifetime of being told he was worthless, was burned away by a single, incandescent thought. A hero saves people. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a conscious decision. His legs, just as they had that day with the sludge villain, just as they had when he'd run for the girl in the fire, moved on their own. Hey! Izuku screamed, his voice cracking with a mixture of terror and desperation. He snatched a fist-sized rock from the ground, the spiritual equivalent of one, and hurled it with all his might. It sailed through the air and struck the hollow's mask with a dull thwack. The attack was laughably pathetic. The hollow barely registered it, its head tilting with what seemed like mild annoyance. But it was enough. Its red eye swiveled from Yuta and fixed on him. Yuta! Run! Izuku shrieked, already grabbing another rock. Get out of here! Now! The boy remained frozen. Izuku's mind raced, a frantic torrent of tactical analysis. Diversion created. Target's attention is on me. But the primary objective, saving Yuta, is not complete. I need to get him moving. He threw another rock, this one bouncing harmlessly off the creature's shoulder. The hollow took another step towards him, its movements slow, deliberate, as if savoring the hunt. There was no time. With a desperate cry, Izuku charged. Not at the hollow, but at Yuta. He slammed into the small boy's side, a clumsy, frantic tackle that sent them both sprawling into the dust. Snap out of it! He yelled, grabbing Yuta's shoulders and shaking him. We have to run! The physical shock was enough to break the boy's paralysis. A terrified sob escaped Yuta's lips. Izuku didn't wait. He hauled the boy to his feet and shoved him towards the narrow alleyway between two houses. Go! Don't look back! Yuta stumbled, then broke into a desperate, tearful sprint, disappearing into the alley. A monstrous shadow fell over Izuku. He had a single, heart-stopping moment to look up. The hollow loomed over him, its mask a landscape of cracked bone and malice. Its clawed hand, bigger than his entire body, descended. There was no time to dodge. No time to run. This was it. The end of his second, short life. His body moved again, instinct overriding all thought. He didn't try to escape. Instead, he threw himself forward, back towards the mouth of the alley where Yuta had fled, his arms spread wide as if to shield the empty space. It was a completely irrational, useless gesture, but it was all he could think to do. I will be a shield. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the impact, for the sensation of being torn apart. His mind flashed with a final, heartbreaking image, his mother, crying, telling him she was sorry. I'm sorry, Mom, I guess. I couldn't be a hero after all. But the pain never came. Instead, there was light, an explosion of it, erupting from the very center of his being. It was a brilliant, blinding emerald green, a raw, untamed torrent of energy that burst from him in a concussive wave. It was not an attack, it was a release. A desperate, primal scream of a soul that refused to let another person be harmed in front of it. The world turned green and silent. An immense pressure, far greater than anything the hollow exuded, slammed into the air. The dust around him was blasted away in a perfect circle. The descending claw of the hollow halted, then was violently thrown back as if it had struck an invisible, solid wall. The hollow itself stumbled back, a bewildered, guttural cry escaping its maw. A spider web of cracks spread across its mask from the sheer force of the spiritual pressure. It was stunned, disoriented, its single red eye wide with confusion. It had been hunting a lamb, and had stumbled upon a sleeping dragon. The light faded as quickly as it had appeared. The energy vanished, leaving a void in its wake. Izuku's legs gave out from under him. The world swam, his consciousness fraying at the edges. His last sensation was the feeling of collapsing into the dust, his body, his spiritual form, utterly and completely spent. His final, fading thought was a simple, relieved one. Yuta got away. Then, everything went black. A gentle presence. That was the first thing Izuku perceived as he drifted back to consciousness. It was a stark contrast to the predatory cold of the hollow. This was a deep, calm ocean of power, vast and ancient, but held with a serene, almost gentle restraint. It was like standing in the shadow of a mountain and feeling not fear, but awe. He blinked, his vision blurry. The gray, oppressive sky was gone. The normal, placid blue had returned. The screaming had stopped. He was lying on his back, staring up at a face. It was a kind face, framed by long, wavy white hair. The man's features were soft, his eyes a gentle gray that held a hint of weary amusement and a profound, underlying sadness. He wore the standard black robes Izuku had heard about, the shahakusho, but over it, he wore a white haori, the unmistakable symbol of a Shinigami captain. The man smiled, a small, reassuring expression. Well now, that's quite the nap. Are you alright, young man? Izuku tried to push himself up, but his limbs felt like they were filled with lead. He managed a weak, pathetic groan. Easy there, the captain said, his voice as calm as his presence. You've expended a great deal of energy. It's a miracle you're conscious at all. Behind the captain, the hollow was gone. There was no sign of a struggle, only a faint, dissipating dust in the air. This man had dealt with it. Effortlessly, Izuku suspected. The little boy, Izuku rasped, his throat dry. Is he? The captain's smile widened slightly. He's safe. He and the others are being tended to. Thanks to you? Relief washed over Izuku with such force that it left him dizzy. He had done it. He had actually saved someone. He sank back to the ground, a shaky, tearful laugh escaping his lips. The captain watched him, his expression unreadable. He remained silent for a long moment, simply observing the disheveled boy covered in dust, his green hair a chaotic mess, his soul still thrumming with the faint, wild echoes of the power he had just unleashed. Finally, the captain spoke again, his tone shifting from gentle concern to quiet curiosity. I have a question for you, he said, kneeling down to Izuku's level. When that hollow was about to strike, every other soul was running for their lives. But you ran towards the danger. And when you couldn't run anymore, you tried to shield an empty space. Why? The question cut through Izuku's exhaustion. He looked at the captain, at the genuine inquiry in his ancient eyes. He didn't have a complex answer. He didn't have a grand philosophy. He only had the truth, the one that had defined his entire existence. He swallowed, trying to find his voice. I don't know, he mumbled, the words tumbling out in a familiar, self-deprecating stutter. My legs they just moved. There was a little boy, and he was scared, and my body it moved on its own. He looked down at his hands, clenching them into fists. It was the only thing I could do. The captain was silent for another long moment. His gaze was intense, analytical, as if he were peering directly into the core of Izuku's soul. He wasn't looking at the remnants of the boy's power. He was looking at the source of it. At the selfless, reckless, heroic spirit that had ignited it. Finally, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was a smile that seemed to lift some of the weariness from his features. I see, he said, as if Izuku's simple, stammered confession was the most profound answer in the world. He stood up, brushing the dust from his robes. That power you just released, that was your Ryoryoku. Your spiritual energy. Most souls have it, but yours is exceptional. And exceptionally uncontrolled. He gestured vaguely at the cracked ground around them. You released it all in a single, desperate burst. A dangerous gamble, but one that paid off. Izuku stared, dumbfounded. Power? He had power? All his life, he had been defined by his lack of it. To hear that he possessed something exceptional was so foreign, so utterly unbelievable, that he couldn't process it. But I can't even see Shinigami, he said, the words laced with confusion. I thought I was just empty. Emptiness and potential are two very different things, the captain countered gently. Your spirit has the potential for a vast reservoir of power. You simply lack the training to perceive or control it. What you did, it was like an infant lifting a boulder. The strength was there, but without knowledge or control, it was a danger to yourself as much as to your enemy. He looked out over the slowly recovering district of Gemenin, where souls were beginning to peek out from their hiding places. His expression grew serious. A power like that, left untamed, can be a tragedy waiting to happen, he said, his gaze returning to Izuku. But a heart like yours, a heart that moves on its own to save others, without a single thought for its own safety, that is a treasure. Power can be taught. A spirit like that must be forged. He extended a hand to Izuku. My name is Jushiro Yukitake, captain of Squad 13. Izuku's eyes widened. A captain. One of the 13 strongest Shinigami in the entire Soul Society. He took the offered hand, and Yukitake pulled him to his feet with surprising strength. Izuku Midoriya, Yukitake continued, his voice taking on a formal, yet kind, tone. I am offering you a choice. You can remain here in the Rakangai, and hope that your power never erupts like that again. Or you can come with me. You can enroll in the Shino Academy. It is a place where you can learn to control that power, to shape it, to give it form and purpose. He leaned in slightly, his gray eyes locking with Izuku's. It is a place where you can learn to become a Shinigami. A place where you can channel that heroic heart of yours not into a single, self-destructive act, but into a lifetime of service. A place where you can gain the strength to protect everyone. The words struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. Gain the strength to protect everyone. It was the echo of his life's deepest, most impossible wish. The dream he had cried over, bled for, and ultimately died for. The chance he had been denied in one world was now being offered to him in the next. The words he had longed to hear from his hero, from anyone, were now being spoken by a man who radiated a quiet, profound strength Izuku could only dream of. His meticulously constructed composure, the one he used to hide his insecurities and his pain, shattered into a million pieces. The tears he'd been holding back since he'd woken up in this strange, new world finally came. They streamed down his face, hot and silent at first, then his shoulders began to shake with choked, overwhelming sobs. It wasn't a cry of sadness or fear. It was a cry of pure, unadulterated relief. The relief of a soul that had been wandering in the dark and had just been shown the sun. Through his tears, he looked at Captain Yukitake, at this kind, powerful man who saw not a useless, powerless soul, but a hero in the making. He tried to speak, but the only sound that came out was a strangled sob. He nodded his head, a frantic, desperate motion. Yes, he finally managed to whisper, the single word thick with all the hope and yearning of a lifetime. Please. Yes. Yukitake's smile was gentle and knowing. He placed a comforting hand on Izuku's shoulder. Then welcome, Izuku Midoriya. Your first step to becoming a hero begins now. As he stood there, crying under the endless blue sky of the Soul Society, Izuku looked down at his own trembling hands. They didn't feel useless anymore. For the first time, in this life or the last, they felt like they held the spark of a future. A future where he wouldn't just have to wish he could save people. A future where he would have the power to actually do it. The memory of the brilliant, emerald light, his light, flickered in his mind. It was a tiny flame in the vastness of his soul, but for the first time, it was there. And he would learn to make it burn. The journey from the Rakangai to the Siriidii was less a physical passage and more a spiritual ascension. One moment, Izuku was standing beside Captain Yukitake on the dusty ground of Gemenin. The next, they passed through a towering gate manned by a giant whose name Izuku was too intimidated to ask, and the entire world shifted. The air itself changed. In the Rakangai, the atmosphere was thin, placid. Here, it was thick, heavy, and thrumming with an energy so dense it felt like walking underwater. It was Reisher, the spiritual particles that made up the very substance of the soul society, concentrated to an almost tangible degree. Izuku felt a constant, crushing pressure on his soul, a silent declaration of the power that resided here. It wasn't hostile, but it was immense, a passive flex of the Siriidi's might. He found himself unconsciously hunching his shoulders, making himself smaller, as if to lessen the weight. Captain Yukitake chuckled softly beside him. It takes some getting used to. Think of it as high-altitude training for the soul. In time, you won't even notice it. Izuku could only nod, his eyes wide as he took in his surroundings. The rustic simplicity of the Rakangai was gone, replaced by a breathtaking, sprawling city of white stone and dark wood. Perfectly manicured gardens with raked sand and ancient, gnarled trees sat beside massive dojos and towering pagodas. Everything was clean, orderly, and ancient. It was a fortress monastery of impossible scale. Black-robed Shinigami of all shapes and sizes moved with quiet purpose along the pristine white streets, their zanpakuto resting at their sides. Some gave Captain Yukitake respectful bows as they passed, their gazes flicking curiously toward the scruffy, green-haired boy beside him. This was the heart of the Soul Society, the home of the Godai 13. It was more awe-inspiring and terrifying than Yuehai had ever been. The Shino Academy, or the Spiritual Arts Academy, was a vast compound within the Siriidii itself. It was walled off, a city within a city, with its own dormitories, training grounds, and lecture halls. As Yukitake escorted him to the entrance, Izuku clutched the strap of the simple bag Chio had given him, his worn notebook a comforting, solid weight inside. Your potential got you through the door, Izuku-kun, Yukitake said, stopping before the main gate. His expression was kind but serious. But from this day forward, potential is not enough. You will be tested, you will be pushed. You will likely fail more times than you succeed. Do not let that discourage you. The path of a Shinigami is not defined by the absence of failure, but by the will to stand up after every fall. Izuku bowed deeply, his voice trembling slightly. I understand, Captain. Thank you. For everything. I won't let you down. Yukitake placed a hand on his head, a gesture that was surprisingly fatherly. Don't worry about letting me down. Just don't let yourself down. With those final words of encouragement, the captain departed, leaving Izuku to face the imposing gates of the academy alone. He took a deep breath, straightened his back, and walked through. His new life was beginning. The opening ceremony was a somber, formal affair. Hundreds of new students, most from the Rakangai but a noticeable few carrying the proud, aloof air of nobility, were gathered in a massive, open-air hall. The headmaster, a stern, elderly Shinigami, gave a speech about honor, duty, and the sacred responsibility of maintaining the balance between worlds. It was nothing like the bombastic speeches of pro-heroes. It was a heavy, solemn charge. Izuku found his assigned dormitory and classroom, a whirlwind of new names and faces. He was placed in the first year, advanced class, a decision made on the sheer, raw measure of his Riryoku, much to the confusion of his peers. He was a boy from the Rakangai with no family name, dressed in a standard, slightly too large student uniform, and he already felt the weight of 100 questioning stares. The first few weeks established a grueling routine. Mornings were for theoretical studies. Afternoons were for practical application. Izuku quickly discovered he was living in two completely different worlds. The classroom was his sanctuary. The subjects were complex and fascinating: Keto theory, holotaxonomy, soul society history, combat strategy. While other students struggled to memorize the intricate incantations or the classifications of Minos Grande, Izuku absorbed it all like a sponge. His mind, honed by years of analyzing quirks, found a new and exhilarating purpose. He wasn't just memorizing, he was connecting, hypothesizing, deconstructing. In a keto theory class, the instructor, a woman named Koga-sensei with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, was explaining the fundamental principles of the first Hado spell, Sho, thrust. The key to Sho, she explained, pacing before the class, is not the volume of Ryatsu, but the precision of its release. It is a focused, concussive burst. Most of you will simply throw your energy forward. A true master shapes it into an invisible, unstoppable spear. Now, who can tell me the primary reason for a beginner's spell failure, aside from a lack of power? A few hands went up. A noble-born student answered confidently, improper incantation, sensei. A possibility, but not the primary reason, Koga-sensei dismissed. Another student suggested, wavering focus? Closer, but still not the core issue. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on Izuku, who was furiously scribbling in his notebook, his brow furrowed in concentration, muttering under his breath. You! The green-haired one from Junranin. You seem to be having a very intense conversation with your notebook. Perhaps you'd care to share your thoughts with the rest of us? The class snickered. Izuku jumped, his face flushing a brilliant red. I am so sorry, sensei. I was just, spit it out, boy. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting from his notes to the instructor. I think the primary failure point isn't just focus, but intent. The spell's name is Show Thrust. It's directional. It's aggressive. I think most beginners fail because their intent is too vague. They think push or go away instead of pierce. The spiritual energy, the Ryatsu, is a manifestation of the soul's will. If the will is unfocused, the energy scatters. It needs a clear, precise command from the soul itself, even before the incantation is spoken. The words are just a tool to help shape a pre-existing, focused intent. The classroom went silent. The other students stared at him, some with confusion, others with nascent annoyance. Koga-sensei stood frozen for a moment, her sharp eyes blinking slowly. She then gave a thin, rare smile. An astute and perfectly articulated answer, Midoriya. Intent is the core of all Kido. Excellent. A warm feeling spread through Izuku's chest. For the first time, he felt like he belonged. He saw a kind-faced girl with short black hair give him a small, encouraging smile from across the room. He later learned her name was Momo Hinamori. She was one of the few who approached him after class, her eyes bright with genuine curiosity. That was amazing, Midoriya-kun, she said, her voice cheerful. I never thought of it like that. Pre-existing, focused intent, it makes so much sense. Izuku, flustered by the positive attention, could only stammer a thank you. It's just theory, he mumbled, clutching his notebook to his chest like a shield. Still, you have a real talent for this. She beamed. Momo became his first real friend at the academy. She was bright, earnest, and unfailingly kind, often seeking him out to discuss a difficult lecture or share notes. She seemed to see past his awkwardness to the passionate, analytical mind beneath. With her, the theoretical world of a Shinigami was a thrilling puzzle to be solved. The afternoon, however, was his personal hell. The moment he stepped onto the sprawling dirt floor of the Zanjutsu dojo, holding a heavy wooden bakken, his classroom confidence evaporated. Here, theory meant nothing. Here, there was only the body, the blade, and the opponent. His instructor, a gruff, powerfully built man named Takeda-sensei, barked commands. Footwork. Your stance is everything. A sloppy foundation means a sloppy strike. Midoriya, your feet are tangled like wet noodles. Izuku's mind understood perfectly. He had diagrams in his notebook of the 8 basic stances. He knew the optimal angle for a downward slash, the precise hip rotation needed to generate power, but his body refused to cooperate. His movements were clumsy, jerky, and hopelessly telegraphed. He thought too much. Okay, opponent is using a high guard. He's baiting a low attack. If I feint to the left shin, I can bring my blade up to strike his exposed wrist in a 0.7-second window. I need to shift my weight to my back foot then. Whack! The sharp impact of wood against his helmet sent him stumbling back, his ears ringing. His opponent, a nondescript student with average grades, lowered his bakken and gave a bored sigh. You think too much, Takeda-sensei growled from the sidelines. A sword fight is a conversation of instincts, not a debate. You're trying to write a thesis paper while your opponent is screaming in your face. Again, it was the same, day after day. He was disarmed, tripped, or outmaneuvered with embarrassing ease. The snickers that had been confined to the classroom now followed him onto the training grounds, louder and more confident. He was becoming a running joke, the boy with the brilliant mind and the useless body, And no one embodied that sentiment more than Renji Abarai. Renji was a force of nature. A tall, lanky student from the 78th district of the Rukongai, he had a wild mane of crimson hair pulled into a high ponytail and a brash, arrogant confidence that seemed to radiate from him in waves. In the classroom, he was a disaster, often dozing off or doodling on his desk. But in the dojo, he was a prodigy. He didn't seem to think at all. His movements were fluid, powerful, and purely instinctual. His swings were wild but brutally effective, overwhelming his opponents with sheer aggression and unpredictable speed. While Izuku was struggling to master the first basic form, Renji was already fighting on par with the senior students, a savage grin plastered on his face. He and his small group of friends took a special kind of pleasure in Izuku's failures. "Look at him," Renji sneered one afternoon, leaning against a post as he watched Izuku get disarmed for the 10th time. "Scribbler's at it again. Bet his notebook has a whole chapter on the proper way to eat dirt." His friends roared with laughter. Izuku felt his cheeks burn with shame, but he just picked up his bakken and reset his stance, his knuckles white. The true nightmare, however, was Kido practice. If Zanjutsu was a struggle, Hakuda, hand-to-hand combat, a clumsy mess, and Shunpa, flash step, an impossible dream, then Kido was a public spectacle of his deepest failing, his abysmal Ryatsu control, the very thing that had gotten him into the academy. His immense well of raw Riryoku was now his greatest curse. Controlling it was like trying to drink from a fire hose. The class was lined up, practicing the very spell Izuku had so brilliantly analyzed. Heido 1. Show. Remember Midoriya's words, Koga-sensei instructed, a hint of irony in her voice. Focus your intent. Pierce. Do not simply push. One by one, the students stepped forward. Momo produced a small, neat pop of energy that sent a practiced dummy skidding back a few inches. A perfect, controlled burst. Renji stepped up, grinned, and without an incantation unleashed a blast that was far too powerful, but still directional, knocking his dummy clean off its stand. He earned a reprimand for his lack of discipline and a dozen impressed looks for his raw power. Then, it was Izuku's turn. He took a deep breath, calming his racing heart. "Okay. I can do this. I know how it works. Pre-existing, focused intent. Pierce. Don't just push. Pierce." He raised his palm, his eyes narrowed on the straw dummy. Heido number 1. Show. He tried to draw out a tiny, precise stream of his Riryoku, shaping it with the command as he theorized. But the moment he opened the tap, nothing came out. It was like the energy was stuck, refusing to answer such a small, delicate call. A pathetic wisp of green smoke, no bigger than a firefly, drifted from his palm and dissipated. The class erupted in laughter. It was a wave of ridicule that crashed over him, cold and sharp. "Wow, what a thrust!" Someone jeered. "I think a strong breeze could do more damage." Koga-sensei's face was a mask of disappointment. Again Midoriya. "Focus!" Izuku's face was burning. He was humiliated. The theory was perfect, but the application was a complete failure. He had to prove them wrong. He had to prove himself wrong. More power, he thought, desperation clawing at him. Maybe I was too cautious. I need to push more through. He took another shaky breath, shutting out the laughter. He focused on the dummy, but this time, he didn't just think Pierce. He thought of the hollow. He thought of Captain Yukite's power. He thought of Renji's effortless blast. He reached deeper into the vast, churning sea of energy within him and pulled. Heido number 1, SHO. He roared, shoving all his frustration and desperation into the spell. For a split second it worked. A brilliant, emerald light flared at his palm, humming with incredible power. But he had no idea how to shape it. It was too much, too fast, too wild. The focused intent shattered under the sheer volume of energy. The carefully constructed channel of the Kido spell collapsed. The result was not a thrust. It was an explosion. Kaboom! A violent, uncontrolled detonation of green energy erupted from his hand. It wasn't directed at the dummy. It went everywhere. The blast threw Izuku backward, sending him tumbling head over heels. It kicked up a massive cloud of dust and smoke, and the shockwave made the students closest to him stumble back in alarm. When the dust settled, Izuku was lying flat on his back, covered in soot, his uniform singed, and a trickle of blood running from his nose. His ears were ringing, and the air smelled of ozone and burnt spiritual energy. The laughter this time was different. It was still there, but it was mixed with shock and a little bit of fear. They hadn't been expecting that. Renji Abarai walked over, peering down at him through the haze. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You're a hazard, you know that?" Renji said, his voice low and cold. "You've got all this power rattling around inside you with no idea how to use it. You're not just weak, you're dangerous. People like you are the first to get your comrades killed on a mission." He nudged Izuku's shoulder with the toe of his sandal. "All that scribbling in your book, it's worthless. You can't think your way into being strong. You either are or you aren't. And you, bookworm, are not." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Izuku lying in the dirt, the words striking him with more force than the explosion had. In the back of the crowd, a girl with dark purple hair and calm, violet eyes watched the scene unfold. She hadn't laughed. She hadn't even flinched at the explosion. Rukia Kuchiki, a student who carried herself with a quiet dignity that set her apart, had simply observed. She noted the other students' fear, Renji's disdain, and the sheer, raw magnitude of the energy Izuku had accidentally released. It was chaotic, yes. Uncontrolled, certainly, but the volume of it, it was more than anyone else in their year, Renji included. She saw not a weakling, but a puzzle. A dangerous, fascinating puzzle. Her gaze lingered on Izuku for a moment longer before she turned and walked away, her expression thoughtful. That night, Izuku skipped dinner. He sat alone in his small, sparse dormitory room, the silence amplifying the echo of Renji's words. "You get your comrades killed." It was his greatest fear. It was the reason he'd thrown himself in front of the hollow. He would rather be erased from existence than be the cause of someone else's pain. And now, his own power, the very thing that was supposed to make him a hero, was being framed as a liability. He was back to square one. A Deku. A useless person who couldn't do anything right. The confidence he'd felt in the classroom felt like a distant, foolish memory. What good was knowing how a sword should be swung if you couldn't swing it? What good was understanding the theory of Kido if you couldn't even cast the simplest spell without blowing yourself up? He pulled out his notebook, its pages filled with neat, precise handwriting, complex diagrams, and insightful analyses. He flipped through it, his vision blurring with unshed tears. He had a whole page dedicated to Renji's fighting style, breaking down his stance, his tells, the way he favored aggressive, lunging attacks. He had another section detailing the theoretical application of Reiatsu control, with exercises he'd designed for himself. It all felt like a mockery. A soft knock came at his door. He hastily wiped his eyes and called out a weak "come in." The door slid open to reveal Momo Hinamori. She was holding a tray with 2 rice balls and a cup of tea. Her usual cheerful smile was replaced with a look of gentle concern. "I noticed you weren't at dinner," she said softly, stepping inside. "I thought you might be hungry." I'm not," he lied, his voice thick. Momo ignored the lie and set the tray down on his small desk. She looked at his open notebook, then back at his face. "Don't listen to Abarai-kun," she said, her voice firm. "He's all instinct and no thought. He doesn't understand that there's more than one way to be strong." "But he's right," Izuku whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I'm a hazard. I can't control my own power. I failed at Sanjutsu. I failed at Kido. I'm at the bottom of the class in everything that actually matters." "That's not true," Momo insisted, her fists clenching at her sides. "You're at the top of the class in theory. No one understands how this all works better than you do." "That's not nothing, Midoriya-kun. That's the foundation. What good is a foundation if you can't build anything on it?" He shot back, a flash of his frustration breaking through his despair. He immediately regretted his tone, slumping in his chair. "I'm sorry. I feel like I'm back where I started. Quirkless. Powerless. Only now I have power, and it just makes everything worse." Momo sat down on the edge of his bed, her expression softening. When I was little, she began, her voice quiet, I really struggled with learning to read. The characters all looked the same. I would get so frustrated I would cry. But my mother told me that everyone has a different key for unlocking their own potential. Some people can just open the door. Others have to study the lock, learn how it works, and build the key from scratch. It takes longer, and it's harder, but when the door finally opens, they understand the mechanism better than anyone. She looked at his notebook again, a genuine smile returning to her face. You're building your key, Midoriya-kun. All of this, she gestured to the detailed pages, this is you, studying the lock. It's not a weakness. It's your greatest strength. The rest will come. I know it will. Her simple, unwavering faith was a balm on his wounded spirit. It didn't solve his problems, but it made them feel less insurmountable. He looked at the rice balls, his stomach growling in betrayal of his earlier claim. He picked one up and took a small bite. Thank you, Hinamori-san, he said, his voice hoarse. Really? Of course, she said, standing up to leave. We're friends, aren't we? After she left, Izuku sat in the quiet room, the warmth of the tea and her words spreading through him. Renji's taunts still stung, but Momo's analogy had sparked something in his analytical mind, building the key. He wasn't weak because he had to think. He was weak because his thinking hadn't yet translated into action. The problem wasn't his analysis. The problem was the disconnect between his mind and his soul's energy. He was trying to use his Riryoka like everyone else, following the standard methods. But he wasn't like everyone else. His reservoir was too big, too chaotic. The standard methods were like using a garden hose to tame a tsunami. He needed a different approach. A new key, designed for his specific lock. He turned to a fresh page in his notebook. The familiar scratch of his pen on paper was a comforting sound, the one constant in his old life and his new one. At the top of the page, he wrote a title, his handwriting firming with a renewed sense of purpose. He was still at the bottom of the class. He was still the clumsy, muttering boy who blew himself up. But as he began to write, outlining a new training regimen, new theories on Ryatsu compression, and detailed observations on his own failings, he was no longer just the boy who failed. He was the boy who was analyzing his failure. And for Izuku Midoriya, that was the first, most critical step toward success. The path ahead was steep, and filled with mockery and doubt, but for the first time since coming to the academy, he felt like he was walking on a path of his own making. 6 months at the Shino Academy had passed in a grueling, repetitive rhythm of small victories and crushing defeats. Izuku's world had become a binary of paper and pain. On paper, he was a prodigy. His notebooks, now plural, were thick with meticulous analyses of everything from the subtle variations in hollow Ryatsu signatures to the theoretical possibility of combining Bakudo and Heido spells into a single, complex Kido array. Koga-sensei had taken to giving him advanced texts, watching with a mixture of awe and bewilderment as he deconstructed concepts meant for seated officers. But the moment the paper was put away, the pain began. In the dojo, his body was still a clumsy stranger to the art of the sword. He had improved, but it was the laborious, mechanical improvement of someone who had memorized the dance but could not yet feel the music. Takeda-sensei's booming voice still singled him out for his hesitation, for the fatal microsecond pause between thought and action. His Hakuda was serviceable but lacked any semblance of flow, and his Shunpa was, at best, a quick, lunging stumble that left him winded and off balance. The explosions in Kido practice had lessened in frequency, but not in severity. He had learned to suppress his power, to choke the raging river of his Riryoku down to a manageable trickle. More often than not, this resulted in fizzled, pathetic spells. But occasionally, his concentration would slip, his frustration would boil over, and another uncontrolled detonation would earn him the scorn of his peers and a week of cleaning duties. He was Izuku Midoriya, the Academy's great paradox, a genius with the practical aptitude of a rock. He was still, unequivocally, at the bottom of the class in everything that truly mattered for survival. The gap between him and the others was becoming a chasm. Renji Aburai fought with a savage grace that was both terrifying and mesmerizing, his raw power already earning him the attention of the 11th Division. Momo Hinamori, his only true friend, had proven to be a Kido prodigy, her spells precise, powerful, and elegantly cast. Even the quiet, observant Rukia Kichiki moved with a refined, noble grace and zanjutsu that bespoke a lifetime of training he couldn't possibly comprehend. Now a new and perhaps the most crucial trial had begun, one that threatened to leave him behind for good, Jinzen. The Jinzen dojo was different from the others. It was a simple, unadorned hall of dark, polished wood, enclosed on all sides. There were no windows, the only light coming from a few soft glowing lanterns. The air inside was still and heavy, thick with the scent of old wood and incense. It was a place designed for one purpose, to turn the gaze inward. Their instructor for this discipline was a man named Master Inaba, an ancient Shinigami who seemed more like a gentle grandfather than a warrior. He was small and wizened, with a long, white beard and eyes that were perpetually half-closed, as if in a state of constant, peaceful meditation. Yet when he spoke, his voice was clear and resonant, cutting through the silence with absolute authority. Your Zanpakuto is not merely a sword, Master Inaba explained on their first day, his voice echoing in the hushed hall. The students sat in neat rows in the size of position, each with their plain, nameless asachi laid respectfully before them. It is a reflection of your soul. It is your partner, your other half. It has been with you since the moment of your spiritual birth. It has a name. To achieve Shirkai, the first true release of a Shinigami's power, you must learn that name. And to learn the name, you must first learn to listen. He gestured to the asachi. This blade is a blank slate, forged from the souls of countless Shinigami. It is a vessel, waiting for you to pour your own soul into it. Jinzen is the art of that conversation. You will quiet your mind, reach into your inner world, and speak with the spirit that resides there. This is not a test of power. It is a test of self-knowledge. Izuku felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. Self-knowledge. He had filled notebooks with knowledge about others, about powers, about theories. But when he tried to look inward, all he found was a tangled mess of insecurity, desperate ambition, and the ghost of a quirkless boy from another world. He followed the instructions, closing his eyes and regulating his breathing. He tried to quiet his mind, to reach for the essence of the sword before him. But his mind was never quiet. It was a frantic, buzzing hive of analysis. Okay, Jinzen. A state of meditative focus to commune with a sentient spiritual entity. The entity is a reflection of my soul. Therefore, to find it, I need to understand the core components of my own soul. Component 1, the desire to save. This is primary. Component 2, a history of powerlessness. This creates a drive for strength. Component 3, an analytical nature. Perhaps my Zanpakuto spirit is strategic? Or maybe it's the opposite, a manifestation of the raw, instinctual part of me I can access? Like Rinji's? His thoughts spiraled, building complex profiles of what his Zanpakuto should be like. He pictured a wise, calm spirit like Captain Yukite's. He imagined a fierce, aggressive beast like Rinji's. He even considered a cold, logical entity that mirrored his own analytical side. He was projecting, hypothesizing, trying to solve his soul like an equation. The result was silence. A frustrating, absolute nothingness. It felt like shouting into a void. The first session ended. As the students stirred, stretching their stiff limbs, a low chuckle came from a few rows over. Rinji was grinning, a feral, triumphant look in his eyes. He tapped the flat of his asachi's blade. Heard something, he announced to his friends, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Feisty one, too. Izuku felt a pang of sharp, bitter envy. Of course Rinji had heard something. His soul was simple, direct, a straight line of aggression and ambition. He didn't have to think, he just was. Days turned into weeks. The Jinzen sessions became a new form of torture for Izuku. Other students began to report progress. Momo spoke of a warm, gentle presence, a feeling of being enveloped in light. Rukia, ever reserved, simply mentioned a cool, clear voice. Whispers spread of students who had already learned the full name of their Zanpakuto, and were beginning private training for their Shirkai. Izuku heard only static. The harder he tried, the louder the noise in his own head became. His desperation grew, turning his meditations into frantic, pleading internal monologues. Please, just talk to me. He would beg the silent sword. I need you. I can't become a hero without you. I'll do anything. I'll train harder, I'll study more. I just need you to give me a chance. Tell me what you want me to be. He was trying to bargain with his own soul. One evening, unable to bear the thought of another failed session, he stayed behind in the empty Jinzen dojo long after the other students had left. He sat alone in the near darkness, staring at the impassive steel of his Asachi. The frustration was a physical thing, a burning pressure behind his eyes. He felt the familiar sting of tears. Why won't you answer me? He whispered to the blade, his voice cracking. Am I just too weak? Is my soul empty after all? Is there nothing in there to talk to? You are asking the wrong questions. The voice, calm and ancient, made Izuku jump so hard he nearly fell over. Master Inaba was standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the moonlight from the courtyard. He moved with a silence that was absolute. Master Inaba. I am so sorry. I didn't know anyone was here. Izuku stammered, scrambling to his feet and bowing deeply. Inaba walked slowly into the room, his wooden sandals making soft, rhythmic clicks on the polished floor. He stopped in front of Izuku and looked down at the Asachi lying between them. I have been observing you, Izuku Midoriya, he said, his half-closed eyes seeming to pierce the darkness. In all my years, I have rarely seen a student strive with such frantic intensity. Izuku's face burned with shame. I'm sorry, sir. I'm trying my best. No, Inaba corrected, his voice gentle but firm. You are trying everyone else's best. I have seen you watching Rinji Abarai. I have heard you speak of Captain Yukitake with reverence. I see the way you analyze the Kido of Momo Hinamori. You are trying to find their Zanpakuto, not your own. The words struck Izuku with the force of a physical blow. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. It was the truth. You treat your soul as an obstacle to be conquered, Inaba continued, his gaze unwavering. You bombard it with logic, with pleas, with the ghosts of other people's ideals. You are shouting so loudly, you cannot possibly hear the answer that is being whispered back to you. He knelt down, his old joints barely making a sound, and placed a wrinkled hand on the hilt of Izuku's Asachi. A Zanpakuto is a reflection of one's true self, Midoriya. Not the self you wish you were. Not the self you think you should be. The self you are, in your quietest, most honest moments. It is not a tool you acquire, it is a partner you acknowledge. It has been with you since the moment your soul was born. It knows you better than you know yourself. It knows your fears, your hopes, and your deepest, most singular desire. Stop shouting at it. Stop trying to impress it. And for once, just listen. Master Inaba stood, gave a slight bow, and departed as silently as he had arrived, leaving Izuku alone in the moonlit dojo with the weight of his revelation. The self you are. He walked back to his dormitory in a daze, Inaba's words echoing in his mind. He didn't go to his room. Instead, he climbed onto the roof of the barracks, a place he sometimes went to be alone. He sat on the cool tiles, the vast, starless sky of the Soul Society stretching out above him. For the first time in months, he left his notebook in his room. It was a symbolic gesture. He needed to stop analyzing. He needed to stop thinking. He needed to be. Who am I? He stripped away the layers. He wasn't the top student in theory. He wasn't the bottom student in practice. He wasn't Captain Yukitake's protege. He wasn't Rinji's rival. He wasn't even a Shinigami yet. Those were all labels, roles he was trying to play. He reached further back. He thought of his death. The fire, the fear, the little girl's smile. He thought of the sludge villain, of his legs moving on their own. He thought of 1,000 different times he'd seen someone in trouble and his first, overwhelming instinct was a desperate, burning need to help, even when he was powerless. He thought of All Might, on that rooftop so long ago. What was the question he had asked? Can even someone without a quirk be a hero like you? That was it. That was the core. Everything else, the analysis, the training, the desperation for power, it all served that one, singular, unwavering goal. He didn't want power for its own sake. He didn't want to be strong just to beat Rinji in a duel. He wanted to be strong so he could stand in front of someone who was scared and say, with a smile that banished all fear, "It's fine now." Why? Because I am here. And in that moment of pure, unadulterated clarity, he understood his mistake. He had been approaching his Asachi as a weapon. A sword. A tool for fighting, for cutting, for destroying hollows. Because that's what a Shinigami's sword did. But that's not what he wanted. He didn't want a weapon to kill. He wanted a power to protect. He wanted a shield, not a blade. He wanted a force that could break through despair, not just flesh. The sword was just the medium, the vessel for that desire. His approach had been fundamentally wrong. He wasn't asking for the right thing. A profound sense of calm settled over him, a peace he hadn't felt since arriving in the Soul Society. He knew what he had to do. He returned to his room, retrieved his Asachi, and went back to the now empty Jin-Zen dojo. He sat in the center of the hall, the moonlight casting a silver rectangle on the floor. He laid the blade before him, but this time he didn't see it as a puzzle to be solved. He saw it as a partner waiting to be acknowledged. He closed his eyes. He didn't force his breathing. He didn't try to clear his mind. He just let it be, filled with the quiet certainty of his purpose. He didn't project any images or ask any questions. He simply presented his soul, raw and honest, to the blade. This is me, he thought, a simple, silent offering. The boy who wants to save everyone. For a long time, there was nothing. Not the loud static of before, but a deep, peaceful silence. He didn't panic. He didn't push. He just waited. He listened, and then, something shifted. The darkness behind his eyes was not empty. It had depth. A pinprick of green light appeared in the distance, faint but steady. He didn't try to move towards it. He just watched it, and it began to grow, expanding slowly, calmly, until it filled his vision. The feeling of the hard wooden floor beneath him faded. The cool air of the dojo was replaced by a sense of immense, vibrant life. He was no longer in the dojo. He was standing on a patch of soft, dark earth. Around him, a forest of impossible scale stretched in every direction. The trees were colossal, their trunks thicker than buildings, their canopies so high they formed a second sky. They were not normal trees. Their bark was a dark, almost black wood, but running through it were intricate patterns that pulsed with a soft, emerald light. The leaves on the high branches were a kaleidoscope of every shade of green imaginable, and crackling veins of the same emerald energy, like contained lightning, danced between them. The air hummed with a raw, untamed power. It was his own Riryoku, but it wasn't chaotic or explosive here. It was the lifeblood of this world, vast and potent, but also serene. This was his inner world, his soul. It was a place of immense, wild potential. He was small here, a tiny figure in a world of giants. But he wasn't afraid. He felt at home. He looked around, a sense of wonder filling him. "Hello?" he called out, his voice not echoing, but seeming to be absorbed by the living forest. "Is anyone here?" There was no immediate answer. Only the gentle hum of the world and the soft pulse of light from the trees. He took a step forward, then another, walking deeper into the colossal woods. He wasn't trying to find a spirit to command. He was exploring his own soul, getting to know it. "I think I understand now," he said, speaking to the forest itself. "I was trying too hard. I was asking you to be something you aren't. Something I'm not. I don't want to just be a warrior. I don't want to just cut things." He stopped and placed a hand on the trunk of one of the giant trees. He could feel the energy thrumming beneath the bark, a powerful, steady heartbeat. "I want to save people," he said, his voice quiet but firm, filled with a conviction that came from the very core of his being. "That's all I've ever wanted. I need the power to protect, the power to stand between the helpless and the things that would harm them." That's what we are, isn't it?" The forest seemed to brighten in response. The emerald light in the trees pulsed a little faster, a little stronger, and then a voice answered. It was not a single voice from a single location. It was a chorus, a resonance that came from every tree, every leaf, every blade of grass. It was deep and powerful, ancient and young, and it vibrated through the very ground he stood on, through his entire spiritual being. It spoke a single, clear, powerful word, a word that was not a name, but a purpose. A command. A promise. Save. The word hit him with the force of a tidal wave, a pure, concentrated blast of his own deepest desire reflected back at him. It was an affirmation, a confirmation, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The green light of the forest intensified, becoming almost blinding. The world dissolved into a brilliant, emerald supernova, and Izuku felt a powerful, warm connection forged between him and the sword lying in the real world. A link, a bond, a partnership finally, truly acknowledged. He opened his eyes with a sharp gasp. He was back in the Jinzen dojo. The moon had moved across the sky, its light now slanting through the opposite side of the hall. He had been gone for hours. He looked down. The Asachi lying before him was no longer just a piece of plain, nameless steel. A faint, soft, emerald light was pulsing from within the blade, a gentle, steady rhythm like a sleeping heart. He reached out and hesitantly placed his hand on the hilt. He no longer felt the cold, impersonal metal. He felt a hum of energy, a familiar, welcoming presence. The static in his soul was gone, replaced by this quiet, powerful hum. He didn't have the full name yet. He knew, with an instinct he hadn't possessed before, that a single word was not a name. It was just the beginning. The first step on a long road. But it was more than he'd had before. It was a direction. It was a promise. A small, watery smile touched his lips. He lifted the sword, its faint glow casting his face in a soft green light. He wasn't at the bottom of the class anymore. He wasn't lost. He had a partner, and together they had a purpose. He would still have to struggle, he would still have to train, and he would probably still fail 100 more times. But he wouldn't be doing it alone. The announcement of the first-year field mission sent a palpable ripple of excitement and trepidation through the Shino Academy. For months, their training had been confined to the sterile, controlled environments of the Siriidii. The hollows they fought were captured, low-level specimens, often defanged and used for target practice. The world of the living, or Gensei, was a concept, a series of lectures and textbook diagrams. Now, it was about to become their reality. The mission was simple, a rite of passage for all aspiring Shinigami, a supervised deployment to a spiritually active town in Japan to perform a kanso, a soul burial, on wandering spirits and to cleanse any lesser hollows that might appear. It was designed to be a low-risk, high-impact learning experience. A taste of the real world. Izuku felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his gut that had little to do with fighting hollows. He was going back. Not to his home, not to Muzutafu, but to the world he had died in. He would be surrounded by the sights and sounds of a life he'd left behind, cars, skyscrapers, living, breathing humans with their vibrant, colorful quirks. It felt like visiting a ghost. The team assignments were posted on a large board in the main hall, drawing a massive crowd of chattering students. Izuku pushed his way through, his eyes scanning the list for his name. He found it under Team 4. His heart sank as he read the names of his squad mates. Izuku Midoriya, Kenji Tanaka, Emi Sato, Rinji Abarai. Of course. It was an almost comically cruel twist of fate. He was being paired with his most vocal critic, the one person who embodied everything he wasn't. Kenji and Emi were unremarkable students, quiet and competent, but Rinji's presence cast a long, arrogant shadow over the entire assignment. Just my luck! A familiar, gravelly voice grumbled from behind him. Izuku turned to see Rinji staring at the board, a deep scowl on his face. Stuck on babysitting duty with the professor, Rinji's eyes met Izuku's, and they were filled with a cold, dismissive fire. Don't get in my way, scribbler, he warned, jabbing a finger in Izuku's direction. This isn't a classroom. Out there, your notebooks can't save you. If you slow us down, I'll leave you behind. Got it? Izuku could only manage a tight, nervous nod. He wanted to say something, to protest that he wouldn't be a burden, but the words died in his throat. Rinji's confidence was a physical force, and it flattened Izuku's own fragile self-esteem. Their supervising instructor was Takeda-sensei, their gruff Zanjutsu master. He gathered the 4 of them at the Senkamin, the gate that connected the Soul Society to the world of the living. He looked them over, his expression as severe as ever. Listen up, brats, he began, his voice a low growl. This is not a game. The hollows you face will not be the neutered pets you've practiced on. They will be hungry. They will be vicious. Your objective is reconnaissance, conso, and cleansing of minor threats only. If you encounter anything stronger than a standard hollow, your orders are to retreat and report. Do not engage. Am I clear? Yes, sensei. They chorused, though Renji's affirmation was more of a bored grunt. Abarai. Takeda-sensei said, his eyes narrowing on the red-haired prodigy. Your skills are advanced, but your ego is a liability. You are part of a team. Act like it. Midoriya. Izuku flinched as the instructor's gaze fell on him. Keep your head in the fight, not in the clouds. Your analysis is useless if you hesitate. Tanaka Sato, you two are the support. Your job is to watch their backs and keep your heads on a swivel. Now move out. The Senkaman opened, a sliding paper door that revealed a swirling, chaotic vortex of energy. Stepping through it was a disorienting experience. For a moment, Izuku was suspended in a void of rushing colors and screaming noise, a dimension between dimensions known as the Daonai. Then, just as suddenly, they emerged, stepping out into the cool night air of a world that was both alien and achingly familiar. They stood on the rooftop of a tall building in a place called Karakura Town. The sensory overload was immediate. The air, thick with the unfamiliar sense of exhaust fumes, street food, and rain on asphalt, was a shock after the sterile purity of the Siriidii. The city below was a sprawling galaxy of electric lights, headlights of cars moving in orderly streams, neon signs blazing in a riot of color, the warm yellow glow from 1,000 apartment windows. The hum of the city was a living thing, a constant, low-frequency thrum of life that was utterly absent from the soul's society. Izuku felt a wave of profound melancholy wash over him. This was what he had been fighting for in his past life. This ordinary, beautiful, bustling world of the living. He saw a group of teenagers laughing as they walked down the street, their faces illuminated by their phones. One of them had a minor mutation quirk, cat-like ears twitching atop her head. The sight sent a pang of longing through him so sharp it almost took his breath away. Quit gawking! Renji snapped, already scanning the rooftops. We're on a mission, not a field trip. Izuku shook his head, forcing himself to focus. He closed his eyes and extended his spiritual senses. Here, the ratio was thin, almost non-existent compared to the Siriidii, but other energies were vibrant. He could feel the small, flickering lights of human souls all around them. A sea of them. And among them, he could sense the fainter, sadder lights of pluses, the souls of the dead who hadn't yet passed on. I'm picking up 2 pluses 3 blocks south, Emi Sato reported, her voice calm and professional. She was the team's designated sensor. All right, let's get to it, Renji said, already crouching, ready to leap. First one to perform a conso buys the others drinks when we get back. This isn't a competition, Abarai. Kenji Tanaka sighed, a weary note in his voice. Kenji was the pragmatist of the group, a steady, if uninspired, swordsman. Before anyone could argue, Renji was gone, a blur of motion as he leaped from rooftop to rooftop with a speed and agility that far outclassed the rest of them. Show off, Kenji muttered, before following at a more measured pace. Emi, Izuku, and Kenji exchanged a resigned look and followed. Izuku Shunpa was still clumsy, but he managed to keep up. He focused on his footing on the next leap, trying to ignore the distracting panorama of the living world below. They found Renji waiting for them in a small, quiet park. 2 faint, shimmering figures stood near a swing set, a young woman and her small child, both looking lost and confused. They were pluses, their chains of fate still intact but beginning to corrode, a sign they'd been lingering for some time. Renji performed the conso with a bored, practiced ease. He tapped the hilt of his Asachi to their foreheads, and with a gentle flash of light, the souls vanished, guided on their way to the Soul Society. Too easy, Renji scoffed, sheathing his sword. Are we sure there are any hollows in this backwater town? As if on cue, a familiar, foul pressure descended upon the park. It was the scent of spiritual decay, of ravenous hunger. A low growl echoed from the shadows beneath a large oak tree. Spoke too soon, Emi whispered, her hand immediately going to her sword. A lesser hollow emerged. It was a grotesque, insected creature, about the size of a large dog, with multiple spindly legs and a cracked, porcelain-like mask. It was a typical, low-grade threat, the kind they had dispatched a dozen times in training. "I'll take this one," Renji declared, a hungry grin spreading across his face. He didn't even wait for an acknowledgement, drawing his blade and charging forward. Izuku's analytical mind immediately kicked in, his eyes scanning the creature. Hollow classification, Insecta minor. Multiple limbs suggest high mobility, possibly able to climb. Mask appears thin, likely a weak point at the ocular sockets. Its stance is low to the ground, preparing for a lunging attack. Renji, of course, cared for none of this. He met the hollow head-on, his movements a whirlwind of aggressive, powerful slashes. The hollow was fast, scuttling back and forth on its insect-like legs, but Renji was faster. He parried a clumsy swipe from its claws and responded with a vicious downward cut that cleaved one of its legs clean off. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, grating sound. It reared back, opening a mouth full of needle-like teeth, and spat a glob of thick, corrosive acid. "Renji, watch out!" Kenji yelled. Renji simply sidestepped the attack with a lazy smirk. The acid splattered against the tree behind him, eating into the bark with a sizzle. While the hollow was still in its attack animation, Renji dashed in and plunged his sword straight through the center of its mask. There was a final, agonized shriek, and the creature dissolved into black dust, its existence purified and erased. The entire fight had lasted less than 10 seconds. Renji spun his sword with a flourish before sheathing it. "See? Nothing to it." He looked back at Izuku, a smug, challenging glint in his eye. "Were you taking notes, Professor? Or were you too busy hiding behind the others?" Izuku's fists clenched at his sides. He had been analyzing, yes. He had identified the weak point, predicted the acid attack. His analysis had been perfect. But it had also been completely and utterly useless. Renji hadn't needed strategy. He hadn't needed analysis. He had just needed to be faster and stronger, and he was. The thought was a cold, hard stone in Izuku's stomach. Renji's taunt was just salt in the wound. "Let's just keep moving," Emi said, trying to diffuse the tension. "My senses are picking up something else. To the west, near the river. It feels bigger." Her words cast a chill over the group. Takeda-sensei's warning about retreating echoed in their minds. "Bigger how?" Kenji asked, his hand resting nervously on his sword hilt. "The pressure is stronger," Emi said, her brow furrowed. "Heavier. I don't think it's a standard hollow." "Good," Renji said, his grin widening. "Finally, a real challenge. Abarai-sensei's orders were to retreat." Kenji reminded him sternly. "Sensei's not here," Renji shot back. "We're Shinigami. We don't run from a fight. We're supposed to protect this place, remember? Or do you want to run back and tell them we were scared off by a little spiritual pressure?" Izuku felt a conflict raging within him. Takeda-sensei's orders were clear. Logic dictated they retreat and report. It was the safe, correct, strategic choice. But Renji's words, arrogant as they were, struck a chord. "We're supposed to protect this place." What if while they were retreating, that stronger hollow hurt someone? A human, or another plus? A hero didn't run when people were in danger. "We should at least get a visual," Izuku found himself saying, his voice quiet but firm. "We can approach with caution, identify the threat, and then make a decision. We can't make a report if we don't know what we're reporting." Renji looked at Izuku with surprise, a flicker of something that might have been reluctant respect in his eyes. "See? Even the scribbler gets it. Let's go." He led the way, and this time, the others followed with a heavy sense of foreboding. They moved silently along the rooftops, the city lights reflecting in their wide, nervous eyes. As they neared the riverbank, the spiritual pressure Emi had detected grew exponentially. It was a suffocating, malevolent presence that felt like a physical weight on their chests. This was far beyond anything they had ever encountered. They took cover behind a large water tower on a rooftop overlooking the wide, grassy riverbank. Below, bathed in the cold glow of the streetlights, was the source of the pressure. It was a monstrosity. The creature was huge, at least twice the size of a bus, and vaguely reptilian. Its skin was thick and leathery, like an alligator's, but a sickly, pale gray. It moved on four thick, powerful legs, each ending in vicious talons that tore up the earth with every step. A long, whip-like tail lashed back and forth, cracking like a bullwhip. But its most terrifying feature was its mask. It wasn't the simple, crude mask of a lesser hollow. This one was complex, layered, like a knight's helm made of bone, with two long, curved horns sweeping back from its temples. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from its chest, a sound that vibrated in their very bones. In front of the beast, cowering in fear, was the shimmering form of a single. The return to the Suriidii was a silent, suffocating affair. The usual post-mission chatter and bravado were absent, replaced by a heavy, oppressive quiet. Kenji and Emi were nursing their spiritual wounds, their faces pale and drawn. Even Rinji was uncharacteristically subdued, his usual arrogance buried beneath a layer of grim exhaustion and the humbling memory of his own powerlessness. But for Izuku, the silence was a roaring inferno in his soul. He was a failure. The word was a brand, seared into his very being. It wasn't just that he had been useless. His uselessness had been a tangible, dangerous liability. He had frozen. When lives were on the line, when his teammates were being thrown around like dolls, his mind, his one supposed asset, had betrayed him. It had flooded with 1,000 useless data points, a torrent of analysis that had paralyzed him instead of empowering him. He had calculated the velocity of the hollow's charge, the tensile strength of its hide, the probable trajectory of its attacks, and had done absolutely nothing with the information. Rinji's words from their first day of Kido practice echoed in his head, now laced with the venom of prophecy. "You'd get your comrades killed." They had been lucky. The timely arrival of Captain Kairaku and Captain Yukitake had been a miracle. If they had been a few seconds later, Rinji would have been torn in half. And it would have been his fault. He, the analyst, the thinker, had contributed nothing but dead weight. In the days that followed, Izuku retreated into himself, building a wall of silent misery that no one could penetrate. The academy became a landscape of his shame. The dojo was a monument to his physical weakness. The Kido training grounds were a testament to his catastrophic lack of control. Even the classroom, once his sanctuary, felt like a cruel joke. What good were theories and grades when they crumbled to dust in the face of real danger? He stopped talking to Momo. She would approach him in the hallways or the mess hall, her face etched with concern, but he would offer only mumbled, one-word answers, his eyes fixed on the floor. He couldn't bear to look at her, couldn't bear to see the pity in her eyes. He felt like a fraud, a pretender who had been exposed in the worst possible way. "Midoriya-kun, are you all right?" she asked one afternoon, catching him as he tried to slip out of a lecture unnoticed. "We're all worried about you. What happened on the mission wasn't your—" "I'm fine," he cut her off, his voice flat and cold. The lie was so blatant it was insulting. He pushed past her without another word, ignoring the hurt expression on her face. Each step away from her felt like a betrayal of their friendship, but it was a pain he felt he deserved. He saw Rinji sometimes, from a distance. The red-haired prodigy was back to his usual swagger, but there was a new, harder edge to it. A defensiveness. Occasionally, Izuku would catch Rinji's eye across a training yard. There was no mockery in his gaze anymore, just a deep, lingering contempt, as if Izuku were a bad memory he was trying to forget. It was worse than the taunts. It was a final, damning judgment. His notebook, his constant companion, lay abandoned on his desk, buried under a pile of discarded training robes. He couldn't bring himself to open it. Every page of meticulous analysis felt like a testament to his own cowardice. Desperation became his new instructor. If his mind was a failure, then he would abandon it. He would force his body to learn the way Rinji's did, through pain, repetition, and brute force. He started training alone, long after the official sessions had ended and the other students were asleep. He found a secluded training ground at the far edge of the academy compound, a simple, dusty yard with a few worn training posts and a single, large boulder. Night after night, he would go there and punish himself. He would swing a heavy, lead-weighted bakken, far heavier than the standard issue, until his arms screamed and his muscles tore. He ignored form, ignored technique, focusing only on the raw, repetitive motion. Swing. 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 He was trying to beat the hesitation out of himself, to carve instinct into his soul with a blade of pure exhaustion. His hands became a mess of blisters that tore open, bled, and then calloused over. He would practice his shunpa, pushing himself to move faster and faster, resulting in clumsy, uncontrolled bursts that often sent him crashing into a training post or tumbling into the dirt. He would pick himself up, bruised and scraped, and do it again. His Keto practice was the worst. He would stand before the large boulder and try to cast show, over and over. He would pour his frustration, his self-loathing, into the spell. The results were always the same, either a pathetic fizzle of green smoke, or a painful, uncontrolled backfire of energy that would singe his hands and leave him gasping on the ground, his own Ryatsu turning on him like a cornered animal. He was trying to become a typical Shinigami. A warrior. He was trying to burn away the part of him that was Izuku Midoriya, the thinker, the analyst, the muttering, quirkless Deku, and replace it with a hollowed-out imitation of Renji Aburai. And he was failing miserably. One night, the failure was absolute. A week of sleepless nights and grueling, pointless training had brought him to the edge of his spiritual and physical limits. He stood before the boulder, his body trembling with exhaustion, his spirit feeling thin and frayed. Just one successful cast, he pleaded with himself, raising a raw, trembling hand. Just one. Prove you're not completely useless. He gathered what little energy he had left, trying to focus it, to give it the intent Koga-sensei had lectured about. But his mind was a chaotic storm of self-hatred. The energy had no clear command to follow. Hado 1, show! He screamed, his voice raw. The resulting explosion was the worst yet. It wasn't a blast, it was an implosion. The energy collapsed inward on his hand, a searing, white-hot pain that felt like his very soul was being scorched. The shockwave threw him violently backwards. His head hit the hard-packed earth with a sickening crack, and the world dissolved into a dizzying smear of gray. He lay there, gasping for air, the taste of blood and ozone in his mouth. Every part of him ached. His spirit felt like a shattered piece of glass. He couldn't get up. He didn't have the strength. He didn't even have the will. This was it. His limit. He had pushed and found nothing but an empty, echoing void of failure. Renji was right. Yukitake had been wrong to give him a chance. He didn't belong here. He wasn't a Shinigami. He was just a boy who wished for the impossible, in this life and the last. A choked, desperate sob escaped his lips, followed by another. He curled into a ball on the cold ground, the proud, aspiring hero reduced to a weeping, broken child. It's no use, he whispered to the uncaring night sky. I can't do it. I'm too weak. A long, quiet moment passed, marked only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. Then, a gentle, familiar cough echoed from the shadows. That is a conclusion you've reached rather quickly, don't you think? Izuku's head snapped up. Standing at the edge of the training ground, his white captain's haori almost glowing in the moonlight, was Jushiro Yukitake. He wasn't smiling. His face was calm, but his gray eyes held a deep, profound sadness as he looked at the pathetic state Izuku was in. In his hand he held a simple wooden flask of water. Captain Yukitake, Izuku stammered, shame washing over him with the force of a physical blow. He tried to scramble to his feet, to bow, to show some semblance of respect, but his body refused to obey. He collapsed back into the dust, a fresh wave of humiliation burning his cheeks. Yukitake walked over slowly, his footsteps making no sound. He knelt beside Izuku, his joints creaking softly, and offered the flask. Drink, he said, his voice soft but firm. Spiritual exhaustion dehydrates the soul's vessel. Izuku took the flask with a trembling hand, the simple gesture of kindness feeling like more than he deserved. He drank deeply, the cool water a soothing balm on his raw throat. Yukitake waited patiently until he was finished. Then he asked, his voice devoid of judgment, "Why are you doing this to yourself, Izuku-kun?" The question broke the dam. All the pain, all the frustration, all the self-hatred came pouring out of Izuku in a torrent of broken, stammered words. "Because I failed," he cried, the words tearing from his throat. "On the mission. I froze. I saw everything, I understood everything, but I couldn't move. Aburai-kun was almost killed, and I just stood there. My analysis, my notes, it's all useless. It's just a distraction. It gets in the way. I need to be stronger, faster. I need to be like him. But I can't. Every time I try, I just break. He looked down at his raw, bleeding hands, tears dripping into the dust. I'm not meant for this. I don't have the right instincts. I'm not a warrior. Yukitake listened to the entire tirade without interruption, his expression unchanging. When Izuku finally fell silent, his shoulders shaking with spent emotion, the captain let the quiet stretch for a long moment. The battlefield is a harsh teacher, Yukitake said finally, his voice a low, gentle rumble. Its first lesson is always one of our own inadequacy. No one, not even the captain commander, has ever entered a true battle and not felt the chill of their own limits. He sighed, a weary, rattling sound deep in his chest, and looked up at the moonless sky. You say you need to be like Renji Abarai. Tell me, do you think I should try to be more like Captain Zaraki? The question was so unexpected it startled Izuku out of his misery. He stared at Yukitake, confused. Kenpachi Zaraki, the captain of the 11th Division, was a monster of battle, a behemoth who lived for the thrill of the fight, overwhelming his enemies with unbelievable spiritual pressure and brutal, unrestrained force. He was the antithesis of the calm, thoughtful, and often sickly Jeshiro Yukitake. And no, of course not, Izuku mumbled. Your fighting styles are completely different. Exactly, Yukitake said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. He coughed again, a deep, racking sound that shook his entire frame. He pressed a hand to his chest until the fit passed. I have been afflicted with this illness since I was a child. It eats at my lungs, drains my spiritual energy. There are days when simply walking from my barracks to a captain's meeting is a struggle. If I were to fight like Kenpachi-kun, relying on pure stamina and overwhelming physical force, I would be dead in the first 30 seconds of the battle. He met Izuku's wide, astonished eyes. For a long time, I saw this illness as my weakness. A curse that held me back. I tried to ignore it, to push through it, much as you are doing now. I trained until I collapsed. I fought until I coughed up blood. And like you, I broke, over and over again. He paused, letting the words sink in. It was my master, Captain Commander Yamamoto, who taught me the truth. He told me that my illness was not my weakness. It was the forge that was shaping my strength. Because I could not rely on stamina, I had to master my Ryatsu control to an absolute degree, to ensure not a single drop was wasted. Because I could not endure long, drawn-out battles, I had to become a master strategist, able to see the course of a fight and end it decisively. My twin blades, Sojio no Kodawari, are not designed for brute force. They are designed to absorb and redirect an opponent's energy, a fighting style born from the necessity of conserving my own. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense and clear. You see my illness as a weakness. I have learned to see it as the crucible that created my unique strength. And now you, Izuku-kun, you look at your own nature, your analytical mind, your caution, your tendency to hesitate and think, and you see it as a weakness. Yukitake reached out and tapped a gentle finger to Izuku's forehead. Your mind is not a weakness, it is the foundation for your power. You are trying to discard it. You should be building upon it. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Izuku stared at Yukitake, his mind struggling to process the monumental shift in perspective. But... I hesitated, Izuku whispered. That's not calculation, that's cowardice. Was it? Yukitake challenged gently. Or was it your mind processing 1,000 variables at once without a clear system to act upon the conclusion? You have trained your mind to analyze, but you have not trained your body and your spirit to trust that analysis. You do not need to stop thinking. You need to think faster. You need to forge a connection between your brain and your blade so seamless that the analysis is the action. He stood up, brushing the dust from his haori. Stop trying to be Renji Abarai. His path is a wildfire, consuming everything in a blaze of instinct. Your path is different. It is the path of a deep river. It may seem slow, but it carves canyons into stone through persistence and unerring pressure. It does not rage. It understands the landscape and finds the most efficient path to the sea. He gestured to Izuku's Asachi, which lay discarded in the dirt. Your Zanpakuto is a reflection of your soul. It has been quiet because you have been screaming at it to be a hammer, when it was born to be a scalpel. Or perhaps, he added, a thoughtful glint in his eye, a shield. Stop trying to force it into a shape that is not its own. Listen to what you truly want, and build your strength from there. With a final, encouraging nod, Captain Yukitake turned and walked away, his white Haori disappearing into the shadows, leaving Izuku alone in the quiet training yard. Izuku remained on the ground for a long time, the captain's words echoing in the silence. Your mind is not a weakness. Build upon it. He slowly, painfully, pushed himself into a sitting position. He looked at his torn hands, at the bruises covering his arms. This was the result of trying to be someone else. This was the result of discarding his own nature. He crawled over to where his Asachi lay. He picked it up, the hilt feeling cool and foreign in his grasp. He remembered the feeling in his inner world, the vast forest of green, the voice that was not a voice, the single, resonant purpose, save. He had forgotten. In his shame and desperation, he had forgotten the one true thing he had learned about his own soul. He didn't want to be a hammer. He didn't want to be a wildfire. He wanted to save people. And how did he, Izuku Midoriya, do that? Not with brute force. Not with blind instinct. He did it by understanding the problem, by finding the cracks, by seeing the path that no one else saw. A new resolve, fragile but fierce, began to kindle in the cold ashes of his despair. Yukitake was right. He had been fighting against himself. It was time to start fighting with himself. He struggled to his feet, his body screaming in protest, and limped back towards his dormitory. He ignored the pain. He ignored the exhaustion. His mind was clear for the first time in days. He entered his dark, silent room and walked to his desk. He pushed aside the pile of dirty robes and picked up his abandoned notebook. It felt heavy in his hands, not with the weight of failure, but with the weight of untapped potential. He sat down, opened it to a clean, fresh page, and uncapped his pen. The familiar, comforting scratch of the nib on the paper was the sound of him coming home to himself. At the top of the page, he wrote a new title. It wasn't about theory. It wasn't about observation. It was about application. Hero Analysis for the Future Godai 13 Edition, Combat Integration of High-Speed Analysis. Phase 1, Weaponizing Thought. He began to write, his hand moving with a new, feverish energy. He wasn't designing a training regimen to make himself stronger. He was designing a new way to fight, a way that didn't discard his mind but made it the very core of his power, a system for making his analysis instantaneous, for linking observation directly to action, for turning hesitation into a weapon of devastating precision. He was no longer trying to be a Shinigami. He was starting to figure out how to be his own kind of Shinigami. And in the quiet solitude of his room, under the watchful, starless sky of the Soul Society, a tiny, brilliant spark of green light began to glow once more in the depths of his soul.